So today we are going to talk about what is the source of shame, all right? Because last week we talked a little bit about what shame is, and this time we're going to talk about some of the things that would cause us to have shame. Because if we understand that, it's going to start to help us to see where this came from, okay? So the first thing, and this is random, I mean, this is not in any particular order, but shame can come from so many different places. So the first thing may be the result of your birth circumstances. You know, if you were an unwanted child for any reason, like maybe you're a girl and your parents wanted a boy, or maybe your parents had a financial lack, or maybe it was just bad timing. Maybe you were born out of wedlock and that was a problem for the people in your family. Any kind of rejection at conception or during the womb experience or even at birth. Even if you are accepted later on and very much loved, that can still leave a deep stamp of illegitimacy on the spirit. I know that I felt that was part of my issue of shame, is that I was born a girl. My mother had two girls and a boy, and then she had a boy that died shortly after birth, or I'm not sure exactly if he died like as he was being delivered or right after delivery, but she definitely lost a boy. And she lost that boy. And then like my mom had each child every spring. Every 2 years in the springtime. So all of my siblings are born in April or May. And I'm the only one that's born in December because I was born 3 years after my brother, is because she had two, and two. And then she had me out of timing because she wanted to, I think, prove that she could have another kid. And she was already 40 at the time that she had me. So, and I think I felt like I was born, and what the Lord showed me was that I felt like I should have been a boy because I felt like I was a replacement for this child that she lost. And I was supposed to be the playmate for my brother, another boy. And so, I spent most of my childhood trying to be my brother's playmate, and that didn't work out very well because we were 3 years apart. He's a boy, I'm a girl. It was not working out well. But anyway, so for me, I think that was part of my shame issue, is that I felt for a long time that I should have been a boy instead of a girl, although I never wanted to be a boy. So it's not that, it was not a gender confusion issue for me. It was simply, I wasn't even aware of it consciously. And it was that the Lord showed that to me later on. But some people are conscious, they know, like their parents might say to them, you were a girl and I always wanted a boy, or my parents never said that to me. They were very happy to have me, even though I was a girl. I was the one that felt like I should have been. And I think it was because that's another thing. If you're born after a miscarriage, you might have a feeling that you're a replacement child and that you're not there in your own right. You were not as wanted as you would have been if you were not a replacement, that you have some role to fulfill for this child that they lost. And I heard that term, I believe, from Elijah House, but I can't remember where exactly I heard that term, but I actually heard it first from the Lord. I was in the shower and I couldn't understand why I had this, I knew that I was exhibiting all the symptoms of rejection, which didn't make sense to me because my parents loved me. And I just heard the Lord say, you're a replacement child. And then later I heard this teaching again. I'm not sure. I think it was in Elijah House that I heard it, but that this idea that after a miscarriage, you are replacing the child that was lost. And that can be a source of shame. Another obvious type of source of shame is what we call type B trauma. I will be teaching on trauma on February 25th. This is 2023. I will be teaching on trauma, and there's two kinds of trauma that we talk about. And the first one I'm going to talk about is this type B trauma, which is about B for bad things that happen to you. And if you have type B trauma in childhood, it could be as mild as being ridiculed at home or in school. That happened to me a lot. Or as serious as being physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. Whenever our boundaries are violated through no fault of our own, we experience type B trauma, and that brings shame, okay? Another kind of trauma, which is the other type, is type A trauma, which is the absence of good things needed, can also bring shame. And this is kind of really, type A trauma is most people don't even realize that they have trauma because of that, because this type A is not something you could put your finger on. I mean, if you've been physically or sexually abused or even emotionally abused, you have something you could point to and say, this happened to me. But when you have a type A trauma, there's nothing to point at. It's the trauma, it's the thing that never happened. So, but it should have happened. It's something you should have had. And if you're coming from a dysfunctional family, okay, you're not going to be helped in finding out what your identity is, because your needs are not met the way they should be. You may not be taught to understand who God is. You're not taught to understand that you're a person of worth and value. You're not taught how to develop relationships. There's so many things that we're supposed to be taught, okay? So you may develop shame for having needs. And it's never, most of the time, children don't even articulate the fact that they have needs. They just know we are born with needs. And I'm just going to go through the 7 basic human needs that we need to have met. And if those are not met, you may have shame. And those 7 basic human needs are love, protection, value, power, to be known, to be heard, and to be understood. Okay, so when I teach on the seminar, I'll probably teach a little bit more about that. But that's basically this whole idea of type A trauma. If you don't get some of these things, or if you get too little of these things, then you may have shame, because you may feel like, well, if I don't get this, if I don't get what I need, it's saying something about who I am. It's saying that I'm not worth getting these things. And so, and also it's so intangible. It's hard to even realize that you should have had these things. And so you grow up with this sense of shame, but you don't even know why. And, somebody I heard recently say, they grew up in a home where, bad things were always happening, and they didn't know that bad things were not normal, or that not getting certain things was not normal, until they went and visited one of their friends from school, and they would see that their friend had a loving parent, or their friend was getting taught how to do things that they weren't being taught how to do, or their friend wasn't getting abused. And so it was like they started to realize, oh, maybe my home is not normal. And when we have a dysfunctional family, so dysfunctional being either bad things are happening to the children, or the children are not getting what they need, that will engender shame in that person as they're growing up. Words are a super effective vehicle for conveying shame, okay? When we teach prayers that heal the heart, there's one of the sections that we talk about, which is word curses. And we talk about the fact that those word curses are really harmful and hurtful, and cause us to have heart issues. And you can definitely have a heart issue of shame, meaning feeling like you have no value, you have no worth, by direct curse, the different curses. So you have a direct curse. You should be ashamed. I mean, people will actually say, you should be ashamed. You should have shame. And so I had I went to Catholic school for 12 years, and my 7th grade nun, I was telling somebody I'm still getting healing from experiences with my 7th grade nun, who was my teacher, and she was forever shaming us. I mean, it was like every day. I mean, she would call us brazen, and brazen was another way of saying you're a shameful person. Okay, so she was Irish. She would say, you bold and brazen thing. And so, we were just like, ugh. But, you think, you hear it and you don't think it means anything, but it's really impacting you. It's hitting you. And those are direct curses. Then there are indirect curses, where you're being unfavorably compared to other people, or you're being scorned, and, unfavorable comparisons, especially amongst siblings, is so, so hurtful and so shaming. So if you have a sibling who is maybe the good kid and you're the bad kid, you're the black sheep maybe of the family, that's going to be a very shaming thing, and that's an indirect curse. How about words that become lies? Okay, people say things about our appearance, about our performance, our values, whether or not we're accepted. And they're saying things that are not true, that are not according to God's will. And they're saying that, you know, things that are conveying to us that we have very little value, we have very little worth, that we need to perform in order to have value, or that we're never going to be accepted. And those kinds of things will make us will make us grow up with shame. The other thing is labels. You know, when I was a little girl, I was thin. According to my mother, I didn't like to eat much. In fact, I was very picky, and I was really skinny. And so I was called Skinny Minnie, and it was not a good word. It was very shaming. You know, we don't realize, and children are very cruel. Other children will say shaming things to you, but the most shaming things is when your parents say those things to you. If you have people in your life when you're growing up who call you silly, who call you slow, who, you know, they just label you by whatever you're doing. It's just, I won't even say what my brother used to call me. My brother had all kinds of names for me. He always had nicknames for me, and none of those nicknames were complimentary. None of those nicknames were positive. None of those nicknames built me up. And the sad thing was that my mother and father never thought that this was going to be harmful to me. So they never corrected him. They never said to him, don't call her those names. But so those were like labels that hung on me. It was as if he put a sticker on my head. And actually at one point when I was getting healing from the Lord, I saw a label as if it was a sign that was around my neck. And the Lord took it off of me, and I needed him to do that. Okay. I know that when my children were growing up, I was so aware of this. And I remembered that I had one of my children had a little bit of a problem with telling lies. So he was always trying to protect himself, and he wouldn't tell the truth. And I remember very pointedly being sure never to call him a liar, because even though he was lying, and I knew he was lying, and he got caught in those lies, I did not want to put the label of liar on him, because I wanted him to know that that was not his nature. That was not who he was. He may be a boy who tells lies at times to protect himself, but he was not inherently a liar. And today I would say he's probably one of the most honest people that I know. I mean, he will tell you the truth faster than you could say boo. And he doesn't try to protect himself in any way. And so I'm very glad that I did that. Okay. So another source of shame is that shame is very often handed down through what we call a shame-based family system. So you may have some previous generations who suffered physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, either from within the home or outside of the home, or maybe your parents, your grandparents, your great-parents have never been unconditionally loved, or anybody in in your family line. Some of the family legacies that provide that are shame-based are the ones that maybe come from where you have come from a family where there are very rigid religious systems and a lot of legalism, where there's rules but no relationship. And those rules without relationship were used to keep the children in line. So the children had to obey, but it was not coming from a place of love. It was not coming from a place of nurture. You may have had parents who lost home or wealth or position or influence. I feel like that was my family legacy. I come from Haiti, and I was always taught that I came from a family of lawyers, legislators, and educators, and that we had wealth, we had property, we had a plantation. But by the time I came along, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have influence, we didn't have power, we didn't have money. And so I believe that there was this shame that was shrouding my family because of the loss of all of that. Okay. And then of course, I came from a family where there was slavery in the family. So you may have had people in your family who were actually in bondage or slavery. And so you have so many African Americans who don't even realize they're coming from shame-based families, because what was inflicted upon the slaves was to be told that they were of no value except as objects to be used by other people. So you have generations of a family that may have been indoctrinated with the lie that they were not as good as other families, okay? children who are born into such families or cultured are really handicapped, and they're handicapped with that shame at conception, and they had nothing to do with it. Okay. So it's as if they came into the world carrying this receptacle of shame. It's like a shopping bag that gets filled up with all of life's hurts. And no matter how much they empty the bag, it still remains with the person. So they still have this bag, you know, they can get some healing, but unless they get rid of the bag and realize that they started out with this thing that they could fill up with their own experiences of shame, they're still going to have this problem with shame. Okay. So it remains with the person until the shame, which is the identity lie of that family, is removed with God's truth. And one of the ways that you can identify shame in your family is ask yourself, and we're going to do this exercise later with the discussion group, is what are your family's rules? And those are like inner or corporate vows that the family is making about things like, you know, what will we do? A book called Healing Shame, The Shame That Binds You, written by John Bradshaw, outlines 7 rules that are maintained by 7 shame-based families. The first one, he says, is control. One must be in control of all interactions, feelings, and personal behavior at all times, okay? So control is a major defense strategy for shame. I think I mentioned last week that Betsy and Chester Kilstra of Restoring the Foundation discovered this shame, fear, control stronghold. Shame, fear, and control all to go together and form a stronghold. And so he talks about control. The second rule of a shame-based family is perfectionism. You must always be right in everything you do. Family members live according to an externalized image, and no one ever measures up, okay? Number 3, and this is the one that I grew up with, that was really predominant in my family, blame. Whenever things don't turn out as planned, blame yourself or others. So blame is another cover-up from shame. My mother, I used to say, I used to fight with her about this, because if I did something wrong, she would blame my friends, she would blame cousins, anyway, she would always blame somebody else. It was never my fault when I did something. And I'm sorry, number 2 was perfectionism, okay? Always be right in everything you do. That was a question that was asked, and I just wanted to repeat that. Number 3 is blame. Okay, I remember when I came to the Lord, I was raised Roman Catholic, very devout Roman Catholic, and my mom felt that it was a personal rejection of her when I met my husband, and he started to talk to me about Jesus Christ, took me to an Assemblies of God church, and I eventually accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior and Lord and stopped going to Roman Catholic Church, which, again, I said she took as a personal rejection, that I rejected her along with this religion that she had raised me in. And although I didn't reject the wonderful values that she gave me, because she gave me great moral values, she was upset about that. And it was not my fault that I had accepted Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. It was my husband's fault. So blame is a very shame-based family issue. The fourth of these rules from a shame-based family is denial of the 5 freedoms. This denies that you should perceive, think, feel, desire, or imagine the way that you do. You should do these the way the perfectionist ideal demands. So you can't deviate from anything that is not seen as perfectionism. In other words, it's not okay to be yourself. It's not okay to think and feel the way you think and feel. I remember my mother was constantly wondering where I came from, in the sense of she didn't understand me. She didn't get me. So many things that I would do. And then she would kind of muse about it and say, you must be more like your father. And she never seemed to realize, to recognize whether or not that was really the issue. But I think she expected me to be exactly like her. And because I wasn't exactly like her, and I thought completely differently than she did, she couldn't understand me. And so it was part of this, she didn't, like I wasn't supposed to think and feel differently than she thought and felt. Number 5, and this was not something that we had, but kind of my grandparent, I think my grandmother, maybe some of the people, my aunts and uncles may have had this, because there were some things that I found out about my family later on that they probably were adhering to this number 5 rule, which is the no talk rule. This prohibits the full expression of any feeling, need, or want. Okay. And you don't talk about things that in the family that are not good feelings. So you might be able to talk about some other things, but mostly you can't talk about bad feelings. But if you need something, some families will not even let you express what you actually feel or need, all right, or want. Number 6, and this is, again, one of the things that I feel like I suffered from, don't make mistakes. Mistakes will reveal the flawed, vulnerable self. So if you acknowledge a mistake, you open yourself up to scrutiny. People will want to talk about you and find out what's going on with you. So you've got to cover up your mistakes. And if someone else makes a mistake, you shame them. So this is a terrible way to be raised. And then number 7 is unreliability. Don't trust anyone, and you will never be disappointed. This is something that the Lord has really been showing me recently, that I have suffered so much disappointment. And I think that, I'm not sure if this was from my shame-based family, but probably is, that this idea that if you trust people, you're going to get disappointed. And so that's been something that he's been working on me to teach me to trust him and to give him my feelings. But parents who didn't trust did not get their developmental dependency needs met. And so they're not there for their children to depend on. Okay. So these are all the kinds of things, obviously there's going to be permutations of these. There's going to be variations. There's going to be some that are high in these numbers. One of these numbers, you might come from a family that has all 7 of these rules, and then you're going to really be in trouble. Number 4 was denial of the 5 freedoms. I'll just repeat all 7 of these for you. The first one is control. You've got to be in control of all interactions. The second is perfectionism. Always be right in everything you do. The third is blame. Whenever things don't turn out as planned, blame yourself or others. By the way, that's part of the second guessing. I'm really into that. And just, in fact, today I was just talking to the Lord about that. And you know what he said? I was talking to him about something else, and he just said to me, you have to stop with the second guessing. He was pretty blunt. Number 4 is denial of the 5 freedoms, that denies that you should perceive, think, feel, desire, or imagine the way you do. Number 5 is the no talk rule. Don't express your feelings, needs, or want. Number 6 is don't make mistakes, because that will reveal that you are vulnerable. And number 7 is unreliability. Don't trust anyone, and you'll never be disappointed. Okay. So that was from John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And that's on my recommended resources list of books. A couple of other issues. Shame may also be cultural, not just from families. Traumatic historical events such as slavery, losses of territory or position among other nations can affect a whole ethnic group and leave a negative mark on the people. All right. So if you think about the example of ethnic groups that can carry shame as part of their identities, think of the Germans, who are carrying the shame of World War II, and possibly of World War I also, but definitely of World War II. The Japanese, who are carrying the shame of losing in World War II. African Americans whose ancestors were slaves. Native Americans that were so shamed by the settlers that came to America. And then Jews, because of the Holocaust, and of course because of everything the Jews have been through throughout the ages. Also, not just an ethnic group, but a church group can be shame-based. And if a church group is shame-based, now the way I define that is that if you may go to a dysfunctional church, because people who are from shame-based or dysfunctional families are drawn to those kinds of churches. And generally, you have a shame-based or dysfunctional church when the leadership, usually the senior pastor, is dysfunctional or comes from a shame base or dysfunctional family. And I was in a church like that where it was a dysfunctional church, and it just seemed normal to me because I didn't realize the dysfunction that I had come from. And when I started to get some healing, and also, when you come from a dysfunctional church, things start to blow up. And so that kind of blew up, and we left that. And eventually I came to understand that that was the dysfunctional church was because of the leadership was dysfunctional. So there are other ways that shame is placed on us. Sometimes it's through demands of performance and people's unrealistic expectations of us. When our value and acceptance has to be earned, and that's performance orientation. When we are given unrealistic standards to live up to, or the standards are moving targets. And you never quite, they keep saying, well, if you do this, you'll be okay. But then just when you achieve this, the standard changes. Unjust punishment is definitely shaming. When you're punished for making mistakes, you're a child and you spill milk and you get spanked for spilling milk. That's a very stark example. But I don't know, it happens. Somebody just fell off okay. Anyway, I'm going to continue. Or if you're, as a child, if you're being held accountable or made to feel wrong for things that are beyond your control. If you're, if you're a 2-year-old and you haven't been potty trained yet, and you're being spanked, or you're being made to feel less than because you haven't been able to learn how to go to the bathroom on your own, that's going to be very shaming. Being rejected, abandoned, or neglected are obvious ways of being having shame. There's also the fact that issues of shame can develop through our own habitual sinful acts. Sometimes there are things that we have done that we have continued to do and to indulge in that are terribly defiling and that have caused us to be ashamed. So if you have been involved in pornography and or sexual sin, even after you've confessed that sin, you may still feel the shame of that sin. And that's when we need the Lord to lift the shame from you. Okay. So there's a couple of other things that I want to kind of mention, which we may have mentioned already. I'm going to see if I want to make sure that I get through everything. But the following is kind of a list of some other roots that might produce shame or shame identity. Obviously, physical or emotional abandonment, we mentioned that. If you've been the scapegoat in your family, you may feel that it's your fault and you internalize that you're bad. You keep getting blamed and you don't know what to do about it. And that will cause shame. We mentioned physical or sexual abuse. You could be shamed from poverty if your family grew up poor. And, they could be honorable, they could be honest, they could be loving. But if you were poor and everybody around you, and you didn't have, you might feel shame from that. Any kind of loss of status, such as a financial loss, may result in shame. There's humiliation in that, and you feel put down. Obviously, growing up in an alcoholic family would cause shame because you may never have been able to invite friends over to your house. All right. I know I did not grow up in an alcoholic family, but I grew up, I think it wasn't poverty per se. We always had food, we always had shelter, and we always had clothes. We had everything we needed, but we lived in a very small apartment. There were 6 of us in a 4-room house, 2 bedrooms, and we couldn't invite people over. We definitely couldn't let anybody know that my brother had to share a bedroom with his 3 sisters. And so that was kind of very shaming for us. Anytime you feel different. So if you're not athletic or parts of your body are not perfect, you might be overweight, you might have speech problems, you might feel like you're too short, too dumb, too smart. I felt like I was too smart, which is crazy. Wrong sex, or you live on the wrong side of the tracks. Anything where you feel different from everybody else can be a source of shame for you. So that is basically the teaching on sources of shame. Next week, I'm going to talk about how do you identify whether or not you're suffering from shame, okay? And you may have already identified some of it just from these sources, but we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that feeling of shame. And if you wanted to do an exercise, I would encourage you to just go through what your family's rules are. That's one way to start to think about whether or not you had shame put on you, especially at birth. All right.